Good morning. So it's nice to see you all. And first, the question, can you hear in the back? I suppose, given all of this stuff, I should say, can you hear in the front? So we're going to have a very pleasant morning with the practice of Chenrezig. And our schedule will include the usual first Sunday meditation, which means a period of meditation and instruction in just a few minutes. For perhaps 45 minutes, and then a break. Sufficiently long to allow anyone to use the restrooms that they need to. And then we'll come back and have another session, and another break, and another session, and then lunch. A lunch break. During this time, a couple of things. One is, despite some of your fears, this is not a torture session. So if you find yourself having trouble sitting, the point is not to make you miserable so that you'll have one more thing to deal with, but rather to enjoy the session and learn some things about the meditation on Chenrezig. So if you need to get up and move around at any time, or just to stretch in the place where you are, you're more than welcome to do that. And we may have some official ones of those stretches also. Have we mentioned Lama Tinley? No? We haven't. Yeah. So one announcement. One of the, I guess, would you say, a founding member of KCC? Close. The first resident Lama of KCC, Lama Tinley Drupa, is, for those of you who know him, I suppose for you, those of you who don't know him also, he's in a kind of frail state, we understand. A lot of physical problems, I don't think mental problems, but physical issues, including some heart problems and all. So we raise that so that we can begin our day by thinking about someone other than ourselves. During the entire day, we will try to do some things that help us to give rise to a kind of emotional state, actually. Not a negative one, but one of appreciation for the opportunity that we have to sit together and practice the Dharma together in particular, and then in general, just the general fact that we have at this time a human body that allows us to engage in practices which some people might call helpful, profound, even mystical. One of the most important of those emotive states that I just mentioned is something that drives a lot of spiritual traditions, and that is the emotion of devotion. Devotion to our work, devotion to our appreciation even, to our teachers, especially the lineage holders, the great beings, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Karmapa and so on. Keeping the value of our relationship with these beings in mind gives us kind of energy. That energy allows us to look at our experience without judgment, just look. And from that looking, we sometimes can have the experience that while our experience that we're looking at feels like it's really something, when we look, we can't find that thing. And that moment of not finding is a precious moment that, in order to accomplish the practices, we need to repeat over and over. So during this morning and this afternoon, my intention is to periodically remind us of how these things work. So let me ask, who does not have a text? Who does not have a text? Oh, a Chenrezig text, yeah. Good. Well, we could wait, but we could also use it.
They're on that table right back there. We're out. There's a table moving around.
That was fun.
There are also tables for people, not many, but there are some, and folding tables.
didn't give any homework. Anyway, it's nice to do something together. Do we have enough?
These are longer texts. If you want to purchase one, the US. Anybody else? Michael, do you have one?
Yes, I do. Might be yours for all I know. Does anyone not have a text? Who doesn't have a text? You don't have a text? You were going to share with him. Are we out of texts? Okay. In accordance with our profound cultural tradition, we will begin on page 1. We actually have in the past, somewhat rarely, recited this together. But since this morning and today in general, I wanted to stress the importance of all the things that we can access only through something other than our intellect. I thought to include the prayer to the Lamas of the Mahamudra lineage as the first one of the day. It's, in one sense, not a very interesting recitation. It's a list of names of great beings who have played an extraordinary role, and in some cases still are playing an extraordinary role in the development of teachings and practices in this Mahamudra lineage. But since you don't, at least most of you, will not know the names, nor know their history, it could be just kind of boring. However, my advice is think of it like this. If these beings, and this is a small representative sampling of all of the beings who have played a role in this lineage, if these beings had not existed, we would not be here today. So, in our continuous effort to give rise to a sense of feeling whether it's devotion to one or more of the lineage holders or the entire lineage, whether it is a sense of gratitude to some individual, like we want to give rise to that sense of feeling. It's really an emotive thing, so we don't need to think of it in terms of an attachment emotion, but the power of giving rise to something that gives rise to an emotion can be used, and we will use that today. So we'll recite this lineage, which goes from page 1 to page 6, is that right? Looks like. If you're engaging in this text at any time and you have that sense of appreciation, you finish the text, it's a good time to take a minute. And with the energy of that positive emotion, then you can direct your attention or your awareness to that feeling. For just a few moments. So when you look at that feeling, it's common and in fact should be predictable that you will not find that feeling. And when you don't find that feeling, then the instruction is relax again without replacing the non-conceptual experience of the absence of the feeling. We just rest again in that absence. Not too long. We don't want to begin another conversation with ourselves or indulge in some further distraction. So the moment of the emotion, the feeling, for want of a better term for it, taking that energy and using it to focus your awareness on the experience should happen rather quickly, not as long as we took this morning, so that you don't fall back into a distracted state. So then on page 7, we continue. It says this book contains the recitation for the meditation of the great compassionate one called Benefiting Beings Vast as the Sky. And on page 9 we begin the preliminary practice of refuge. So I think most of you are familiar with the practice of refuge, but for any of you who are not, in essence, the practice of refuge well, we could talk about it for a few weeks. But in this moment, one way to look at it is that we come to the end of a page, we stop, we rest, and whether we notice it or not, we go for refuge. In our thoughts, our ideas, our attachments, our aversions, all of that. Which is why we don't want to remain too long without having something that we're doing. So here, to read the English first, perhaps we could read it together from page 9. from this moment until the heart of enlightenment is reached, I and all sentient beings equaling the limits of space, we go for refuge to the glorious holy Lamas. We go for refuge to the Yidams, the deities of the mandala. We go for refuge to the Buddhas, the transcendent conquerors. We go for refuge to the sacred Dharma. We go for refuge to the noble Sangha. We go for refuge to the assembly of Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors and guardians who possess the eye of intrinsic awareness. We go for refuge to the glorious holy Lamas. We go for refuge to the Idams, the deities of the mandala. We go for refuge to the Buddhas, the transcendent conquerors. We go for refuge to the sacred Dharma. We go for refuge to the noble Sangha. We go for refuge to the assembly of Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors and guardians who possess the eye of intrinsic awareness. We're going to recite it one more time, but just to acknowledge that there are a number of terms in the refuge prayer that you may not be familiar with, and we're not going to take the many hours and days to familiarize ourselves completely with those terms. So you can just pay attention to those which you are familiar with, for starters. Like we go for refuge to the glorious holy Lamas references all of the teachers that we're familiar with, that we have an appreciation for, that we study with, or that we have studied in their biographies and so on. In other words, they have been an inspiration. When it says we go for refuge to the Yidams, the deities of the mandala, now we're talking about the esoteric kind of mystical practices of the Vajrayana. And for that, we need to go into them more, so we'll leave that for now. Then where it says we go for refuge to the Buddhas, we all understand something about the meaning of the word Buddha. That the Buddha, the name Buddha, the word Buddha refers to an historical figure. We know that much, and maybe we have a sense of appreciation there, which we should encourage in ourselves. Maybe we have a sense of devotion, depending upon how long we've been engaged in the practices. So we encourage again the power of that feeling. When we say we go for refuge to the Buddhas, we can think in terms of all the Buddhas. And maybe not everyone has realized that there's more than one. In this very room, we have at least 40. And counting. We are each fully endowed with the awakening mind, whether we recognize it or not. And so in that sense, we may not be fully matured Buddhas, but we all possess the seed. So when we say we go for refuge to the Buddhas, the transcendent conquerors, we're primarily looking at those individuals who have matured. But it's important for us also to have a sense of the teaching that the Buddha himself gave, that there was no difference between him and all other beings except for the fact that he recognized that awakening mind and we do not. Which is to say, we're on our way to recognizing it. And then we go for refuge to the sacred Dharma, which is the teachings that bring us to the point of recognizing that awakening mind. We go for refuge to the noble Sangha. So the Sangha in this case is the community of practitioners. For starters, we can think of all of us here in this room like a community of people, like-minded individuals who are engaged in the practice. But when we talk about Dharma, we're also talking about the vast, exalted Sangha of great beings who practice together, who teach the Dharma, those upon whom we rely for their teachings, their inspiration, their kindness and compassion, and so on. Our wish is to become like them, one of them. And in the moment that we recognize all of that is possible, and that, again, that emotion that can arise around that, we are that Sangha. Then we go for refuge to the assembly, more secret words. We go for refuge to the assembly of Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors and guardians who possess the eye of intrinsic awareness. Ooh. These we are going to have to get to. You cannot meet everybody in the first day. And I know this isn't the first day, but you know, it's the first day since the last time that we had a day. So I'm calling it the first day. So we have repeated the refuge prayer twice. Let's repeat it one more time, and I hope that that reciting the Tibetan sometimes and the English sometimes is meant to be helpful. What we sometimes say is that the entire tradition came to us in Tibetan. And for a long time we recited everything in Tibetan and didn't know what we were saying. But we had the sense of connection, and that sense of connection is really very important. No matter what language it's in, if you don't have that sense of connection, you don't have the Dharma. So we have recited it in Tibetan and English, and my guess is for the rest of our lives we'll continue to do that. We understand from one of our great teachers that if you do not also recite it in English, English will never be a sacred language. So the way that it became sacred in Tibetan was that it was recited over and over. So we have an obligation from both sides not to burn the bridge down before we've crossed the river, and also to make sure that we do what's necessary, that the bridge is intact and that it carries us to where we need to go. So we will recite now once again the refuge prayer on page 10.
O Palden Lama Dampa Namla Kyabsu Jo Yedam Kilkor Gilatso Namla Kyabsu Jo Sanjay Chomden De Namla Kyabsu Dampe Chu Namla Kyabsu Cho Pape Gandu Namla Kyabsu Cho Pawo Kandro Chukyon Sunre So Yeshe
That refuge prayer we might say the long one. And the one that follows on page 11 is a short one. So in many places we find short things and long things. The idea being that if you have time, you do the long thing, and if you don't, you do the short thing, so that you always have something to do when you remember to do it. So we'll recite this prayer, the Refuge and Bodhicitta prayer. Let's do it once in English and twice in Tibetan.
Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. Sanje chudang soki chonam la janju bardu dani kapsuchi dagi janso jipe sonam gidrola penche sanje Sanje chudam soki chonam la janchu bardu dani kapsuchi dagi janso jipe sonam gidrola penche sanje
Again, one of our themes for today is to develop an emotional tie with the material. So when we go for refuge again, to the things that we recognize in the prayer, to remind ourselves that we're fortunate to have access to these things. Whether we've been doing it for a long time or this is the first time that you've read it, and that from that emotion we gain a certain amount of energy to rest our awareness upon what it is we're doing and what we're experiencing, and we'll get into that a little more later. So I think now we'll stop there and take a break. So often people need a break earlier on the first session. So we'll take probably 15 minutes, I think, in order for people to be ready. But whenever you're ready, if you'll come back and make it known that you're ready, we'll start.